All right, so just to recap, on Monday, we got partway through the contract, so we'll finish that up this morning. And one thing that I did want to mention, it as I'll mention it again as we get to the form, but anytime that there is a blank on the form, I know I talked about several of them other than the blanks that are in paragraph 1. Well, let me just go ahead and pull things up since I'm talking about it. Anytime that there's a blank, that it is really something that can be negotiated. Whether there's a blank that's got, get back to the right thing here. Open up our contract. For instance, well, of course, not in the names or anything in paragraph 1 here, but as we get to and you know, one of these, just kind of a recap here, one of these in paragraph 1E, we have to check one of those boxes, but it does bring me to what I was just going to talk about here. So on line 85, if the buyer is going to be is going to be asking the seller to pay for a home warranty. So we are saying here that the buyer is saying at a cost not to exceed blank. So that would be the cost that you get from the home warranty company. And on line 86, we are naming the warranty company that the buyer wants to use. If the seller says, no, you know what, I'm not, I had a bad experience with them years ago. I am not going to be buying that. I will buy one, but not from that company. So if we ask for one from AB May and the seller, it becomes a negotiable term. The seller can say, I'm not going to buy one from AB May, but I will buy one from Old Republic. So anything in here is negotiable. Got a couple more people asking to come in here. And then the addenda, we talked about that. And as we get to another blank, I hope that everyone understands that all of these blanks on this page are absolutely negotiable. The purchase price, right? That's what the buyer is offering. But if the seller's not happy with that, we make a counter offer. We're not going to go over the counter offer in this particular session. That will be something that we do next month in the contracts class. I do want to talk about the counter offers form because we are seeing more of those come into our business as our market is softening a little bit. Some of those things that we don't see during a really hot seller's market, contingency offers, which we talked about last week, counter offers, some of those things that don't happen when sellers are receiving 14 offers in the first 48 hours that they're on the market. But as our market softens, we do see some of these things come back in. So we will talk about the counter offer next month. Earnest deposit, always a negotiable item. From the buyer's point of view, we want to put as little money down as possible because that is their money that is at risk. I know I did talk about this on Monday that yes, our contract does allow the buyer to expect to receive their earnest money back under certain conditions. There are allowable times for that when the buyer can cancel the contract and expect to get their earnest deposit back, but it's always at risk because we do have to have the seller's signature for any disbursement of those funds. So from the buyer's perspective, we want as little money at risk as possible. But from the seller's perspective, if you are receiving an offer, and then we also need to talk about, always looking at the whole picture of these things. From the seller's perspective, the seller is going to want as much money there in the earnest deposit section as possible, because that is their only claim in the contract. Should something go awry, that would be basically their damages. And we'll talk about that as we finish up the contract here this morning. So from the seller's perspective, they want as much money put down as earnest deposit as possible. So always a negotiable term. I don't think I mentioned this on Monday when we were talking about it, but quite often you will see in a listing that that is somewhere in the comments that 1% of sales price is required for earnest money. So a couple of things I want to say about that. Number one, earnest money is not a requirement of any contract. It is not the consideration. The consideration for our contracts are the buyer's promise to buy and the seller's promise to sell. Earnest money is a pot sweetener. there. It is a negotiable term. So it is not required. What you are being told, if you see that comment in the MLS information, is that that's what the seller wants to see. The seller probably will not seriously consider the offer unless that amount is put down as earnest deposit. But once again, it's all negotiable. And as we will talk about in the last part of this class this morning, there's certain information that you should probably get from the listing agent before you sit down to write the offer. And that would, one of the most important questions is there any other interest that you've had in the property? Are there competing offers right now? Do you have any second showings scheduled? Those kinds of things. And if there's no competition, then, and you're going to be the only offer there, is that 1% absolutely necessary for the seller to consider it? So just keep those things in mind. Everything on this page is negotiable. You may be given indication that of the seller's preferences, but it's all negotiable. What's the blanks that we have in here are on paragraph 4D through F are not necessarily negotiable items when we're talking about the amount of the loan. It's just that's information that the seller is entitled to have as they are considering any offer. Of course, anything that we're asking the seller to pay is negotiable. The seller compensation to the broker assisting the buyer, or any additional seller paid closing costs, negotiable terms. The paragraph 4F3 may not be negotiable if you are in one of those loan products that does require the buyer to not pay certain costs.
Oh, shit. Got it. Dang.
Douglas, are you asking a question?
Oh.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right. Closing and possession date, always negotiable terms. Again, one of those things you should probably ask the listing agent before you sit down to write the offer. Again, you may be given indication in MLS that the seller needs a particular closing date or possession date, or a possession date, I probably should say. But really a great question to ask the listing agent before you sit down to write the offer. How can we accommodate that, or if the buyer can, or if the seller does need something. But what I really wanted to say here is how we started this whole part of the conversation. So for instance, here in our appraised value contingency paragraph. So for instance, on line 264, if it's a cash sale, the buyer may within blank calendar days after the effective date of this contract, and we have our parenthetical in here within the inspection period if left blank. So anytime there's a blank there for a date, we always will have a default in there or a way to figure what that date is. If you are not going to change that in any way, I prefer, and this is just Linda's preference, I prefer that you leave that blank. If, however, you want to change that, if you want to say, if you're asking for a 10-day inspection period, but you do want to extend the appraised value contingency by another week, then because again, offering a cash buyer, the same thing that we typically can offer a borrowing buyer, is let's not do the appraisal until after we get through the inspections. So if you're going to make the change, then make the change, put whatever you want to put in here. So in that situation, if we wanted to extend our appraisal contingency timeframe by 7 days, then we would put 17 days in here. We want the 10 days for our inspection period plus an additional 7. If, however, you're okay with all of that happening within the inspection period, please leave this blank. And this is Linda's justification for that request. If you put a number in here that matches what the default is, and I'm looking at that offer from the listing agent's point of view. I'm number one, my eye's going to be drawn to that, and I understand that might be one reason why you think that would be a good thing to do. My eye is drawn to that, and so two things that I'm thinking are, number one, did they intend to put something else in there? Because that's what the contract already says. So if that's what the contract already says, why are we reiterating it? So, because that would be kind of a Linda thing. Well, I meant to put 17 days in there, but I saw the 10 there, and so I just stuck the 10 in. So number one, did they intend to put something else in? And then also what I see is that an agent filling this out thinks that there are some blanks that are more important than other blanks. And so they will put the 10 in this, but they won't address anything on the finance page, on page 6 of in the paragraph 8 of the finance, on the 45 days. I'm gonna, the 45 days is fine, so I'm going to leave that. Well, no blank is more important than any other blank. And so that's what I really think. Unless you are repeating the default number in every single blank through the contract, I'm confused. All right. So just so if you're going to go with what the default is, please just leave it blank. Of course, all of these are negotiable terms. So put in whatever your buyer, and from our perspective, writing the initial offer, whatever your buyer's comfortable with. So kind of wanted to make that point, and I hope I didn't really confuse that issue. I hope I said things in a clear way. If not, please reach out and let me know. And so that applies to any time that there's a calendar day or a time frame referenced within our contract. All right, so we ended up on Monday. We got through the insurance casualty loss paragraph, and so paragraph and survey. And so we were going to start with the inspections paragraph number 13. Again, one of those that I think most agents become familiar with. I would love for you to be as familiar with every paragraph in the contract as you are with this one, because we do have dates and certain obligations and rights included in this paragraph. But again, even if you're familiar with some of those, you may not be familiar with everything that this paragraph says. So we're going to hit the highlights here. So I think everyone is familiar with line 462, or I shouldn't say that because some of you are very, very new. So we'll go here, but you will become familiar with line 462. Buyer may within blank calendar days, and our default here is 10. And we will now reference that 10-day time period as the inspection period. And then that starts after the effective date of the contract. So you're writing the offer today on Wednesday. Couple of renegotiations or negotiations happening over the next couple of days. So the seller either signs this on Friday, or we have a counter offer that's signed on Friday. Friday is the effective date of the contract. And today being the 26th, that would mean that our effective date of the contract is the 28th. We don't have any way of indicating that on our current documents, on our current contract. We just look at the date of the last signature or initial to the document and use that as our effective date. What starts our inspection period time frame is midnight of the day that is closed. 11:59 is the end of our effective date. Midnight starts our first day. So our first full day, and the reason that we do that is because it could be 10:30 at night when we get our final signature. Well, we can't count that as our first day because, well, we can't call our inspector that day, and can't, get things started with the title company and that kind of thing. So our first day starts at midnight on the 29th. That's day one of our inspection period. And I know that that does cause some confusion for some people. So you all get that straight in your head as you are starting this whole process. And then maybe you're going to be the one that clarifies that for a co-op agent that you're working with. There are agents out there that don't understand it. I will even say that there are brokers out there that don't understand it. I've had those conversations with brokers, but that's the way it works. Midnight on, in our example here, midnight on the 29th is what starts our first day. There's a quite extensive, I want to talk about 463 and 464 also. So 10 days or whatever is negotiated. And then here's just a negotiating tactic that I like to use. I always try to extend that whenever possible. I know that if you're in competition with other offers, that you might want to shorten that time frame. If you're going to do that, make sure that you've talked with the inspectors beforehand, and made sure that they are available. If you're going to shorten that to a 7-day time frame, make sure that your inspectors are there, are available to be there, and make sure that your buyer's available during that time frame. Another thing to consider, though, is that even if you've talked with your whole house inspector and maybe even the sewer line inspector, I know that you all have talked about these things in launch classes, but some of the more common inspections, and probably the ones that we talk about the importance of all inspections, but the ones that are, probably most eminent, would be sewer line, radon, and whole house. And of course, termites usually included in the whole house, but not always. So those, and so even if you've talked with those particular inspectors and they're available within that 7-day time frame, it's things show up on the whole house inspection that you as the agent assisting the buyer might suggest to the buyer that they have inspected during this time frame. A roof inspection, an HVAC inspection. Yes, some of those, and when those come up, sometimes you can make that a request on your resolution of unacceptable conditions, that you ask the seller to have those inspections and the inspection reports made available to you. But sometimes it's that you really want the buyer to have a little more control. So just kind of bear in mind that sometimes the 7 days may not be enough time to get everybody out there that you need. Roofers can usually come through pretty quickly for you, especially if you have a relationship with a roofer. And we've got some great ones associated with our office, and you will find your own great ones as well. But sometimes it's those HVAC people, or if the sewer line inspector can't get all the way through because there's a problem, again, you might ask the seller to have the line cleaned and have it re-inspected, or you may want to get somebody else out there. So sometimes you might want to consider all of that. Again, I know if you're in competition, shortening that is a way to strengthen your offer, and I'm all for that as well. Just bear in mind that we may have to maybe ask for an extension of that time frame. But again, if you're in competition, the seller might not be open to that. But for the most part, I do try to ask for 12 to 14 days here for a couple of different reasons. Number one, to accommodate any of those secondary inspections that might come up. Also, keep in mind your calendar as you are figuring these dates. If you're writing the offer and it's going to be accepted over a weekend, your weekend's pretty much shot, unless you've already had those pre conversations with your inspectors. So you're going to have at least 2 weekends where you're not going to get anybody out there. Some inspectors do have Friday inspections, don't get me wrong on that, but nobody does on Sundays. And so make sure that you're allowing enough time. So unless I know I'm in competition, I usually ask for 12 to 14 days here. But again, each situation is just a little bit different. Then continuing on with line 463, have property inspections by an independent qualified inspector. Neither Kansas nor Missouri requires an inspector, and Ashley's joining us, require an inspector to be licensed. But there are professional organizations that cover this profession. So not only whole house inspectors, but some of those secondary inspections as well, pool inspections and roof inspectors and that kind of thing. So that's kind of our benchmark for what's an independent qualified inspector. So independent qualified then puts those inspections in a kind of separate category from Uncle Joe coming through with his screwdriver and flashlight. Uncle Joe can come through with his screwdriver and flashlight as long as he's not doing any damage to the property. And the buyer can certainly consider what Uncle Joe would have to say. But no, the resolution of unacceptable conditions will only deal with recommendations made by an independent qualified inspector. So keep that in mind. A lot of investors will do their own inspections, and that's fine. Most inspectors are making their offers, you know, an as-is condition anyway, and will kind of do their inspections during the first or second showing of the property. But so just keep in mind the qualifications of the buyer themselves. And if they do not fit into the category of being an independent qualified inspector, or that they feel comfortable doing their own inspections, that's, you know, kind of there. But just make sure that you are telling them that we can only cancel the contract or make requests for repairs based upon the recommendations of an independent qualified inspector. And then,
Linda, quick question on
sure.
that. So you said in Missouri and Kansas, the inspections can be done by a non-certified inspector?
Yeah, right. Well, neither one of our states require
Require.
require licensing.
So what happens in the case like, I mean, not a lot of people do it, but we've talked about this like in our own group a few times where you can suggest to your own seller, hey, it's, if you like, go ahead and spend a few $100s and get an inspection done for your property. So would you recommend that your seller then uses a qualified or a licensed inspector for it to withhold?
Right. Great point. Absolutely. For a seller to do a pre-inspection, I would absolutely suggest that they go to one of those qualified inspectors. So, and just to clarify, licensure is not required. No inspector is going to be licensed in Kansas or Missouri. We don't
Okay.
require, the states don't require that. Certified is a whole different thing. Certified means that they have met the requirements for one of those professional associations. And I apologize because I can always only remember one, and that's ASHI, and I don't even remember what it stands for. American Society of Home Inspectors, I believe. And then there's another one, NACI, and then there's one other one, and I apologize, I should keep that in my notes, what those are. Those professional organizations, just like the National Association of Realtors, has qualifications that an inspector has to meet before they can become a member of that organization, of that association. A minimum number of inspections done with another qualified inspector is part of it. Certain classes that they have to have taken. I mean, it's real close to being licensed, but it's not. So they have to meet those qualifications to become a member of those associations. We want to use inspectors that are a member of one or more of those associations. And so
Thank you
now,
for that.
answering Amber's question directly, absolutely yes. All of that being said, if you get a qualified roofer to come out and look at the roof and get an okay by a roofer, that's fine. Even if they're not one of those, they're still a qualified inspector. A licensed HVAC person is absolutely qualified to look over the HVAC system. A licensed plumber, a licensed electrician, all of those kinds of people, even though they're not a whole house inspector, absolutely, we would, in fact, that's probably even a little over and above what we would need for a pre-inspection. But does that answer?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, all right. And that's a really good point. We've had situations come up just recently that, a pre-inspection probably would have been a really good idea for that seller to have done. And I know most of us do suggest that to sellers. We can't force anybody to do anything. But it's, but then we're kind of in a, well, I told you so kind of situation though too. So great question. Great. I so appreciate all of you jumping in with these questions because you all learn just as much, if not more, from the questions that are asked than what I yammer on about here. So starting on line 466 and through 470, we have a list of the most common things that are inspected, but it is certainly not an exhaustive list. And the same thing can be said about the inspection advisory addendum that we use. That I suggest that is in all of your buyer folders. Again, most of the more common inspections, but certainly not an exhaustive list. So, but this does kind of go over most of the ones that you will see, but a really good list there. Good thing to direct your buyers to, and also to your sellers to, that, well, these are the things that are going to be inspected. So, you know, take a good look and be prepared for repair requests that might be there. I do like to talk about lines 472 too, also 22, because again, the things that I don't think many agents know is necessarily in the contract, certainly not familiar. All right, it is buyer's responsibility on line 472. It is buyer's responsibility to perform due diligence and verify any information that buyer considers to be material to the purchase of the property. If the property is governed by a homeowners association, it is recommended the buyer determine the HOA funds on hand for expenditures and funds allotted for specific projects. Any information provided by the broker and its affiliated licensees assisting in this transaction is for information and marketing purposes only. Buyer shall complete all due diligence and verification of material concerns during the inspection period. All right, so breaking that down into regular English. Due diligence. And even though it specifically says in here, check with the HOA and make sure that this really applies to those HOAs that maintain certain things within the complex or the area. The pool, the common areas, that kind of thing, really applies to maintenance provided properties. If the HOA replaces the roof in, you know, in a complex, do they have the money to do that? The roofs are 15 years old. Is the money there for that? So all of that, absolutely. But then also, even though it's not specifically said here, due diligence would include that the buyer has received a copy of the rules and regulations for that HOA. Can they put sheds in the backyard? What kinds of fences can they have? Can they park a recreational vehicle on the property? The rules and regs should be readily available. If it's not in MLS already posted there, contact the listing agent. If you're dealing with it for sale by owner, absolutely talk with the seller about that. If it's not available there, go online, see if there's an online presence for that HOA. If it's not available there, go to ask your title company. Most title companies do try to keep an updated library of HOA rules and regs and financial information when they get it. And if it's not available there, then go to the courthouse, because it has to be available there. It is a matter of public record. So make sure that the rules and regulations of the HOA are things that the buyer can abide by. You know, some buyers are, you know, kind of those rebel people. They want this house, but they're a little rebellious and say, well, by gosh, I'm going to put a shed in the backyard. Well, you know, they have the right to make you take it down too. So that's due diligence. Due diligence is also checking with the zoning to make sure if the buyer's planning on running a business out of the home. Checking with the HOA to see if it's permissible, checking with the city to make sure it's permissible. So due diligence is covering all of those things. And it specifically says in here, buyer shall complete all due diligence and verification of material concerns during the inspection period. That's another reason to maybe think about the time frame that you're allowing for that inspection period. If you know that we're going to need to be doing some investigation as far as the HOA or zoning, then allow more time in your inspection period. We also ask that the buyer contact their insurance agent during the inspection period and check on the insurability of the property. There are certain things that might make the property uninsurable. More than 2 layers of roofing materials becoming a real hot button for some insurance companies. The fact that there's a swimming pool on the property make it either uninsurable. All properties are insurable with the pool. It's how much that insurance is going to cost. That may make the borrower unqualified for the loan. If the property, and here's the other thing too, something that may not have shown up on the seller's disclosure, is if there's been a water claim on the property, that may make the property either uninsurable or terribly expensive to insure. There are lots and lots of reasons why the insurance should be dealt with property owner's insurance, homeowner's insurance should be dealt with in the inspection period. You stay on your buyer, making sure that they are making that phone call. Factors affecting inspections, just make sure that the buyer's aware that certain weather conditions may not make certain systems within the property inspectable. Is that a word? Access to property re-inspections. The seller is supposed to give us reasonable access for inspections. Just had that come up at, over the last couple of months too, that a seller says, no, we're not going to let you have a roof inspector come out. Well, sorry, but you gotta. And then also access to the property for a final walkthrough to make sure that all inspection repairs were completed properly. And so for inspections, re-inspections, and final walkthrough, if anything's done to the property during the inspection period, the buyer is responsible for any damage that's done. If we're asking the seller to make any repairs, this is also reiterated on our resolution of unacceptable conditions, but the seller performs those repairs in a workmanlike manner with good quality materials. If you want those repairs done by a professional, then you have to ask specifically for that. Otherwise, the seller can do repairs themselves as long as they're doing it the way it should be done and with good quality materials. Paragraph 13F, wood destroying insects. And this is in bold, but a lot of people, don't bother to read the contract and aren't aware of this. Seller agrees to pay to have the property treated for control of infestation by wood destroying insects if a written inspection report of a certified pest inspector reveals evidence of active infestation or evidence of any past untreated infestation, or for any other reason recommends treatment in the main dwelling unit or included additional structures identified below. And we'll get to that within 30 feet of such unit or structures, or is otherwise required by the government regulations if buyers obtaining a federally related government loan. Buyer will pay for any inspections requested by buyer and or required by buyer's lender. So this whole little subparagraph here says, and we're not finished with it, but says, well, okay, so buyer's paying for the inspection unless otherwise agreed to, because, everything's negotiable. We can ask the seller to pay for the inspections. But buyer agrees to pay for the inspections if we find if the qualified inspector, and now here is a licensed inspector. Should make this clarification. The only time that we need a licensed inspector is for the wood destroying insects. They do have to be licensed. All right, clarification there. So if a licensed wood infestation pest inspector says, oh yeah, I see evidence of current infestation, or I see old termite tunnels, but I don't see any evidence that the property's ever been treated. And there is always evidence that the property's been treated. Usually there are drill holes that have been filled in concrete structures in the driveway, front porch, any back patio, that kind of thing, throughout the garage. And so if they don't see that evidence, they'll think, well, the property was never treated. So I'm going to recommend treatment because I see infestation evidence. So, and so the seller is agreeing in our contract, seller's agreeing to treat for activity. They are not agreeing to pay for any damage done by those wood destroying insects, but for the treatment. Then I also want to tie this in with our in its present condition form. All three boxes, box number 1 and box number 2 and box number 3, all say, take this requirement out, take this requirement away. But also all of those 3 boxes specifically say the seller will do no treatments or repairs. So it takes this out. Everybody needs to be aware of that. And I'm not going to get into cost and that kind of thing, but just be aware that the contract says the seller will do it. The in its present condition document takes that responsibility away. Then we have the inspection report must be delivered within an inspection period. So once again, keep in mind whatever inspection period you've negotiated, Everything has to be done within that inspection period. As we get here, I kind of glossed over it, but it's important that 498 and 499. Anything within 30 feet of the main dwelling on the property, again, because this is our residential form, is included in what can be inspected. So that includes any wood deck, whether it's attached to the property or not, if it's within 30 feet. The storage sheds, again, storage sheds are usually outside of the 30 feet from the main dwelling, so they're not automatically included. If you want it included, then that's where we add in our box down here on line 510 through 513. Anything that is outside of that 30 feet, then that you want included in the inspection, there may be an additional charge for it. So keep that in mind when you're talking with your buyer about it. But these are things that you should be looking for as you are walking the property, as you are showing the property. And so you're making your own notes here that, oh, storage shed, I think is beyond the 30 feet. Need to make my note here if we want that included. We're going to have to write that into the contract. So that's what the subparagraph F2 is all about, any additional structures that we want included. And again, keep in mind and warn your buyer that there probably will be an additional charge for that, not just the base charge for the dwelling improvement inspection. What if the buyer doesn't conduct inspections? Then the buyer waives all of their ability to negotiate repairs or to cancel the contract. What's an unacceptable condition? Anything that the buyer thinks is unacceptable to them. A cracked outlet cover could be an unacceptable condition. So, you know, this is one of those things that gives a buyer a pretty wide out in case they're getting cold feet, you know, about anything, because every inspection report is going to have something on it. So, you know, that's just one of those things. All right, what if the buyer doesn't give timely notice of unacceptable conditions? So again, keep in mind, that's one of those things I write on the outside of my paper folder, is what my effective date is, and when my inspection period ends, because everything has to be done there. If you're going to be asking for repairs, if you're going to accept it as is, whatever, you have to have everything completed within whatever inspection period you have negotiated. Another reason to consider extending that a little bit. You need to give the buyer time to think about things. So not only get the inspections done, get the reports back, have the buyer maybe do secondary inspections or consider what their options are. The buyer may want to consider getting estimates themselves on some of those repairs. Another reason to maybe extend that a little bit. All right, what is not an unacceptable condition? Also very important. What is not an unacceptable condition? And the short answer to this is whatever the seller's disclosure says is not an unacceptable condition. Going back to our seller's disclosure, page 7, all about all of the systems within the property and the personal property left on the property. One of the ways that a seller can designate on page 7 any of those systems, we can say operating and staying, we can say not staying with the property or doesn't apply to the property, but the seller can also designate EX, which means excluded. And if something is marked as excluded, it cannot be used as an unacceptable condition to renegotiate or cancel the contract. Another reason for everyone, you and the buyer, to carefully look over page 7 and know those things before going to look at the property or certainly before writing an offer on that property. Cannot be used. You would hardly ever put anything in here unless, again, you are trying to make your offer more attractive than other competing offers. You might say, okay, well, we know that it's a 20-year-old furnace, but we are not going to use that as an unacceptable condition to cancel. It could be a negotiating tool for your buyer, but seldom is this something that we write an offer, include in an offer. Usually more often referred to in a counter offer when the seller says, well, okay, I will accept your low ball offer, but I'm not going to do any repairs to the roof or the HVAC system or whatever. So, all right. So what is not, some of the more common things on the seller's disclosure that are marked as EX. I think number one is the fireplace and chimney system in a property. Number two would be the HVAC system, but then also refrigerators, the electric or the stove ranges that are left in kitchens. Very common for those to be marked as EX. So make sure that you are keeping in mind that as you are making your offer. Then we get to, and I know we're almost through the first hour. Oh my gosh, I probably will finish up here. So what if the buyer's inspections reveal unacceptable conditions? There are three options for the parties. When the buyer's inspections show things that the buyer says, I will not buy this house unless this is addressed. All right, so three things. The number one, well, the buyer can say, oh, I saw all of these things on the report and I'm okay with all of them. You know, part of our job, I think, is to kind of try to talk buyers off of some ledges here. That, that's welcome to homeownership, loose toilets or handles or possibly a garage door opener that's not hardwired in to the system, because none of them ever are. Welcome to homeownership. These are things for you to deal with when you get in, because we try to narrow down our repair requests or renegotiations to safety items, health concerns, or structural integrity concerns. So, keep that in mind. But of course, some buyers don't always agree with our assessment of those things. So the buyer can absolutely say, yep, I had my inspections done. I'm okay with everything that the inspector said. I will accept the property in its present condition. So that's, our inspection notice has that option on there. So we wouldn't send a resolution of unacceptable conditions, but we do send the inspection notice. Once again, that inspection notice, two things about the inspection notice: has to be sent within the inspection period. And secondly, that ends the inspection period. If you have a 10-day inspection period, you have your inspections done, and regardless of what the buyer wants to do, whether they're going to accept it or offer to renegotiate, once you send that inspection notice to the listing agent, your inspection period is over, even if that's on the 4th day. No more 10 days. You don't have those other 6 days. That ends the inspection period. And we'll then start if this is what we're instigating here, we'll start the renegotiation period, but we'll get to that here in just a second. So accepting the property in its present condition, we send the inspection notice, and that's all. The buyer has the absolute right in our contract to cancel the contract by notifying the seller on the inspection notice within the inspection period and sending a cancellation notice. This is one of those situations in which we tell our buyer, yes, you can cancel the contract and expect to get your earnest deposit back. Our contract allows for that, but buyer, remember, the seller still has to sign that cancellation and release your funds, right? No guarantee you're going to get it back, but absolute right that the contract gives to the buyer. Or our third option is that the buyer can ask the seller to make repairs. This is our offer to renegotiate, or to adjust the sales price, and or to pay some of the loan costs, prepaids, allowable closing costs on behalf of the buyer, either in addition to what they've already agreed to, or if they haven't in the original contract agreed to pay any, then adding that in, or a combination of all three of those things. When we talk about that, when we talked about that earlier, make sure that you are talking with the buyer's lender. If you are making the request to either ask the seller to pay closing costs or increase the amount of closing costs you're asking the seller to pay during this renegotiation period, make sure you're talking with the lender that you're not getting over the cap that that particular loan product allows. So we send the inspection notice regardless of what the buyer's asking. If the buyer's going to ask to renegotiate, then we send the resolution of unacceptable conditions. But in any case, sending that inspection notice ends our inspection period. All right. Then the resolution, we talked about all of that, and then we'll actually talk more about what happens during the resolution when we talk about the resolution of unacceptable conditions. Again, probably next month, we'll hit on all of that. All right, defaults and remedies. Paragraph 14 is all about what happens when one party defaults on one of their obligations in the contract. The seller, oh, well, here we go. And something that I know just came up in the last week or two here at the brokerage. We have a seller that, even though they signed the contract, says now, well, I decided I don't want to pay the buyer broker compensation. So it appears that the seller is going to default on their obligations. So what remedies, legal remedy, does the buyer have in that case? So two remedies that the buyer has: the buyer can specifically enforce this contract, meaning they can take the seller to court and ask for specific performance, ask the judge to force the seller to sell the property according to the terms of the agreement. So that's one thing. So that's number one option that the buyer has. Secondly, the buyer can terminate the contract by written notice to the seller, meaning releasing the seller from the terms of the contract. And the buyer's option, pursue any remedy and damages available by law. Okay, seller, I'm going to release you from the contract, but I am also going to sue you for any damages. Buyer has had lots of expenses. They paid for their inspections, maybe paid for the appraisal, maybe has canceled their current lease on their property. So now they have nowhere to live during the time period until they find another property. So sue for damages, all right? And or get their earnest deposit back. So once this happens, I mean, this is just a basic overview of what the remedies are. If this happens to you, either way, if the seller's the defaulter or if the buyer's the defaulter, tell your client to get an attorney, right? We're not attorneys. This is just a basic overview of what the legal remedies are that the two parties have. If it's the buyer that defaults, once again, the seller may take the buyer to court, ask the judge to specifically enforce the contract, make the buyer buy the property. And yes, judges do that. They certainly do make the seller sell, and they certainly have forced the buyer to buy. There are certain outs. We talked about the ability if the buyer can't get the loan, that's a legitimate out. If there are unacceptable conditions that we can't renegotiate, or the buyer just doesn't want to deal with, that's a legitimate out. These are if the one of the two parties just absolutely says, no, I'm not doing that. Even though I agreed to in writing, I'm not going to do it. So if the buyer's the one that defaults, let's say we get 5 days before closing, the buyer says, I've changed my mind, I've gotten cold feet, I'm not going to perform. All right, what can then the seller do? So yes, seller can ask for a specific performance also. Seller has two choices here, that one that the buyer didn't have. Seller can release the buyer from the terms of the contract and take them to court for damages, or what we call our liquidated damages or prearranged damages clause here also allows the seller to say, all right, I will release you from the terms, but I am keeping your earnest deposit, because after all, that's what the earnest deposit is for. Generally speaking, if the seller says, I'm going to keep the earnest deposit, they can be, again, we're not attorneys, I'm not attorneys, they can be then giving up their right to sue for any other damages. That's why we call it the liquidated damages or prearranged damages, which is exactly why the seller wants the most in earnest deposit that they can gather, because it can be their only remedy at times. So, all right. So again, general overview there. Dispute resolution here. This is our paragraph telling all parties that if they think they have a problem with a party involved, and that could include us and the broker, or certainly the other party to the transaction, that yes, they can sue, but there are other options available to them, mediation being one of those. And this is where I kind of like to throw in, I've kind of backed off of having you add this to your buyer's loops, but because I already asked you to do so much in there. But KCRAR does offer mediation arbitration. And there is a pamphlet available in the KCRAR documents in .loop that explains that. And I think, again, that's a wonderful thing, I think, to send to all of your buyers and sellers. On the other hand, I do know that the downside of that is like, well, that gives them kind of like, puts in their head, oh, I can either do this or sue. And I know we try to keep those thoughts out of buyers and sellers' brains, but our contract does say that mediation is available, binding mediation is available to them. Additional disclosures, kind of want to get through this. We'll go ahead and take our break at 10, but so Kansas requires certain disclosures to be made in our contract. So this is in here to accommodate that requirement. However, I think that it's a very valid thing to have in our contract. Kansas requires the disclosure to all parties that radon is a carcinogen, a known carcinogen. It is prevalent in the region. And so sellers and buyers should be aware of the dangers and be aware of the ability to test and to mitigate radon in an improvement. And so that's why that's there. Also, since we're talking about radon, we'll talk about some of the other dangerous substances that might be found in properties, microbials and other environmental pollutants, mold, carbon monoxide, all kinds of things that can be tested for. And so that's why it's in here. So I'm not minimizing it because when I say that the state requires it, I do think that it's important disclosure. Every one of those things that I think we should talk with every buyer and seller about the dangers of, especially buyers, since we're going over this information typically with a buyer. Lead-based paint disclosure. Everyone here should know that any property built before 1978 requires the seller to make their disclosures, whether they know there's lead-based paint on the property or not, if they have any reports or test results available. And this is our notification to all parties that the seller's required to make that disclosure. The criminal offenders, Kansas and Missouri both require that we have in our contract that the sources that any party can go to, but almost specifically buyers here, to find out whether there are specific legal offenders living in a particular neighborhood. Kansas and Missouri both have their websites available for that, which are, pretty updated, can be, I think, fairly accurate. We absolutely cannot do that research for them. We absolutely cannot answer the question, is this a safe neighborhood? But this is where we direct them. And so I think that these are, maybe at contract time is a little late for that. I think these are the websites that you should have readily available that you can send to the buyer or direct your buyers to, so that they can do their own research before they get to contract time here, because you're going to be asked those questions. Is this a safe neighborhood? Gosh, I don't know. I don't know what your definition of safe is. So, must have lost Jody at some point there. So here are the websites that I can direct you to. I also direct buyers asking that question to the city police department websites. Most cities around here in the metropolitan area have pretty good police report websites, so that the buyer can get a particular report on a particular neighborhood, or at least citywide. So that we can answer that question. Franchise disclosure. Again, we have this in our internal form, but letting all buyers and sellers know that if they have a problem with one of the brokers that is a franchisee, such as Keller Williams, RE/MAX, Realty Execs, EXP, that the franchisor, the national company, is not the responsible party, it's the local broker. Then we have our brokerage relationship disclosure. So this is where I wanted to get to before we took our break. So it's 10:01. We'll get to this when we get back, and I will see you all in 10 minutes. Okay, we are back. Give everybody a minute to get, oh gosh. Yours being weird this morning. All right. So I'll share screen again. All right, brokerage relationship disclosure. So again, this is our required disclosure of who's being represented, if they are, and by whom. And I'm not going to go into all of the possibilities here. I'm just going to tell you where to get the information. So if we have to fill this out if we are the ones writing the contract. So we have to know, number one, how we are representing if we are the buyer, and how the seller is being assisted or represented. That information, if you're writing a property that's available on MLS, that information is available on the information, the MLS info sheet, the full information. And you will find that under LA CAP is the segment that's in. LA CAP stands for listing agent capacity. And you have to look at that, and you have to check a box here. It is possible that it could be a seller's agent. A seller's agent means that the licensee assisting the seller is a supervising broker for the listing company. So it could be seller's agent. Most of the time, it's going to be designated agent, designated seller's agent, and so it will say that on there. It could also state that the agent is a transaction broker. And all of you, I hope, understand that transaction broker means that there is no agency relationship there. That and in this situation, the transaction broker would not be representing either party, because if it's in MLS and you're showing someone else's listing, they're obviously not representing your buyer. And they're also telling you that they are not representing the seller. There are some brokerages here in the Kansas City metro area that will take listings that are non-agency listings. So it could be any one of those three, most commonly designated, but it could be any one of those three. So make sure that you are checking the correct box there. We don't offer disclosed dual agency, so that won't be that. I don't know of any broker in the Kansas City metro area that does offer dual agency, so it's probably never ever going to be there. It is something that is allowed in the state of Missouri, so that's why it has to be on here. But I don't know of any broker that actually does practice that. The buyer's agent, again, you will never check that box because you are never a buyer's agent, but we'll get over to the other side there. However, you can be the designated buyer's agent, because you'll see on line 694, it says licensee assisting the seller. If you are showing a property that is not in MLS, for sale by owner, and you are the designated agent for the buyer, you are still the agent that's representing the seller. I'm sorry, I just misspoke. Cross that out. You are still the agent that is assisting the seller. You are not representing them, you are assisting them. So there might be situations in which you will check that box. But again, it would be a property that is outside of MLS, something that you found that wasn't on the market at all, or if they're sale by owner. If they are not represented, being assisted by anyone else, then you could check that box. Probably won't happen to you often, but it probably will happen to you at some point in your career. Sub-agency, no one around here, we don't practice it, and no one around here does. So you will never check that box. And then if you are in that situation where you're selling and it's showing an unrepresented, if you are assisting an unrepresented seller, then that seller is not being represented. Chances are it's going to be, you're checking the box on line 705 and 708 if you are assisting an unrepresented seller. Now, if they are in MLS and are working with the transaction broker, they're not represented, and that also would apply there too. So buyer's agent over here on the licensee assisting the buyer, you all the time are going to check the designated buyer's agency box there, because that's what you will be working at. You will never be a buyer's agent until you become a supervising broker. You could be, but rarely, and we really try to dissuade anyone from doing this, could be a transaction broker not representing either party. If your buyer absolutely refuses representation, then you are transaction, because you're certainly not representing the seller either. It's not your listing. So again, I said I wasn't going to go through every possibility there, but so there are those circumstances under which maybe you as the listing agent might be assisting the seller in making an offer to a buyer initially, because again, as our market is softening, those possibilities are coming up for you. It might, not very common, but might. So that would change some of the things that you mark on there. But most of the time, you're going to be marking one of the top 3 boxes on the licensee assisting the seller side, and the designated buyer's box on the licensee assisting the buyer side. Then our source of compensation here, we added this in last year. This is, again, there's no standard, making our disclosure that there never has been any standard for commissions to be paid to either broker. And so required disclosure there. And then on line 717, brokers are compensated by, depending on what you have, the request that the buyer has made in the offer. If they're asking the seller to pay your compensation, then we mark the box seller. Most of the time, even if you ask for it, the seller's not going to pay your $4.95. But most of the time, we've kind of gotten away from asking for that, because sellers aren't willing to pay for that. So if your buyer is paying your $4.95, you will also check then the box in front of the buyer. There is compensation being paid by both parties. The only time that you won't check the box by the buyer is if the seller is agreeing to pay your $4.95. Again, as I said, we can always ask for that, but most of the time sellers are kicking that back. No, I'm not going to pay for that. So in a counter offer, this line would have to be addressed. So sometimes it's just kind of cleaner for you to go ahead and eat that $4.95, pay for that yourself, or ask your buyer to pay for it. So, all right, all of that being said, then we require everyone's signature here. You, as the agent assisting the buyer writing the offer, you will sign on line 721, licensee assisting the buyer. If you're selling a for sale by owner or something outside of MLS and you are assisting the seller, you will also sign the left-hand side of that as well. But you will always be signing the right-hand side of that. All buyers sign it at offer time. Even if the seller is going to be making a counter offer to our offer, they will still sign this page 13, and their agent will also sign here, because this signature is not agreeing to any other terms of the contract. This signature here is just saying proper disclosure was made. So we're just signing the disclosure part of that on page 13 here. All right, other terms and conditions. Paragraph 21, earnest money and additional deposits. We're not going to go into all of the detail here. This does designate what the state requirements are for the deposit of the earnest deposit. And again, we already dealt with when it has to be delivered back on page 4 of our contract, and the earnest deposit has to be delivered within 3 calendar days of the effective date, unless agreed to otherwise, but I hope that you don't ever really change that. But then also but this paragraph deals with our state requirements. What happens when the contract is canceled by the parties. And so we will kind of deal with this a little bit, go over some of the verbiage in here. If this contract is terminated on line 741, if this contract is terminated by the express provisions of this contract, meaning that one party or the other is canceling the contract because of a right they are given to do that within the contract, or by other party pursuant to a right expressly given in this contract, the earnest money and additional deposits will be returned to the buyer unless non-refundable, and neither party will have any further rights or obligations under this contract except as otherwise stated in the contract. And I know that makes it sound like, well, Linda, you said that, that we can't tell a buyer that they get it back. Well, you can't because of the next paragraph here on line 746. Notwithstanding any other terms of this contract providing for the forfeiture or refund of earnest money and additional deposits, the parties understand neither the listing broker nor any escrow agent can distribute the earnest money and additional deposits without the written consent of all parties to this contract, unless permitted to do so by applicable state laws. And we're not going to get into the details of that because I don't know of any broker that actually takes advantage of some of the other opportunities. But so that's our paragraph that says, yeah, I know, buyer, you are entitled to your earnest deposit back, but I can't guarantee it until and unless the seller signs off on it. So there's that. Paragraph number 22 are taxes, prorations, and special assessments, letting all parties know that there are certain funds that are going to be collected and dispersed at closing. Those prorated items, taxes being the one that affects every property, but there are other prorations, HOA dues, and maybe heating oil or, something along those lines. And this is our paragraph telling the parties that they're going to be those funds exchanged at closing. The prorations are, debit to one party, a credit to the other, and that the title company or whoever is closing the transaction is going to do their very best to make those as equitable as possible. For taxes, we don't know what the taxes are going to be for this year. So the title company has to make, and it's a very educated guess, but they have to make an educated guess on what the taxes are going to be and how to prorate those at the date of closing. And that neither party really has the right to come back and say, hey, I paid too much or I didn't get enough in that proration. Same thing would apply to, the HOA dues are a little more, can be a little more exact on the prorations, but heating oil, propane, those things are kind of a guess, for us. So, but that everyone is doing the utmost best that they can to make those as equitable as possible, and that nobody has a right to come back at a later date. Evidence of title. I always tell my pre-license class that everything we do once we are licensed and we're starting our business, everything we do from getting up in the morning and sitting down to make our lead generation, phone calls or whatever, all is so that we can get a deed transferred from a seller to a buyer. That's what it's all about. Getting a client, getting an agreement signed, getting a contract signed, and getting to a closing. And then our last paragraph almost here in our contract is then actually dealing with that. It's one of the most important things here, but the rights and obligations certainly are important too. But this is our paragraph saying that the seller is responsible for providing the title insurance that they are, and here in Kansas City, our contract does say that the seller is going to pay for that insurance. Again, everything's negotiable. Could be something that the buyer might offer to pay for to make their offer attractive. But the seller is going to provide the title insurance, meaning marketable title. And in order to do that, they are also then doing the titles, ordering the title search from the title company. So there are obligations here. That preliminary title report, this paragraph says, is going to be delivered to the buyer to give the buyer an opportunity to look it over themselves. And, title companies are busy, so it may take a couple of weeks for them to get that to everyone. And our title companies around here, I think, are generally very good about sending a copy of that preliminary report to everyone, to the buyer, to the seller, to the lender, if there's a lender involved, and to both agents. So please, 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 one of the most important things you can do in your job as a real estate agent is to read that preliminary title report. I know that you've talked about this in your launch trainings as well. And if you haven't had it so far this year, I know that one of the things that we do try to provide at one of the trainings is to get a title representative to come in and talk to you about the title report and about what the title search is all about and the title insurance is all about. Please, please, please read it and understand it. Because there are certain requirements that might be in there that the title company might not get to you. Maybe a week before title, they're going to say, oh yeah, well, so the title report said we need a copy of that divorce decree, or a mortgage release, satisfaction of mortgage, or the deed of reconveyance. And if you're just finding this out a few days before closing, it can be done, but maybe not before closing. So you should have plenty of time in that preliminary report to look it over and help your buyer or seller gather whatever documents might be required in that. That's also when we find out some surprise things that nobody knew about. Maybe there was a mechanic's lien that was just put on the property, so we need to get that dealt with before closing. So all of those things, I mean, we've all been surprised by things that showed up on a preliminary title report. So make sure you're reading it so that when those surprises do happen, that they can be dealt with in a timely manner. All right, then paragraph number 24, our final paragraph in our document. This is our expiration date. Our expiration date for the offer. The default here is 5 days. That's way too long for an offer to be sitting out there. Yes, I do know that, and I hope you know that a buyer can withdraw an offer anytime before communication of acceptance. But 5 days is still a long time. About the only time I would allow 5 days is if we are told that the seller is not going to be reviewing any offers until, 5 days from now, 5 or 6 days from now. Make sure you're having that conversation with your buyer. Make sure you're verifying that with the listing agent. But you can, even if you're told that, you can always put in a shorter time frame in here. The best practice here is 24 to 48 hours. And if your buyer can't wait that 5 days, if they're here for a short period in town looking for properties, go ahead and make a shortened expiration date, even if you've been told otherwise. You may spur that agent, especially if it's a great offer, to present it to the seller if the seller's willing to receive it. So just because you're told that doesn't mean that it's not negotiable. But on the other hand, if you're told that, might as well take that for face value and have that conversation with your buyer. Then we have our legal disclaimer here. Carefully read the terms hereof before signing. When signed by all parties, this document becomes part of a legally binding contract. If not understood, consult an attorney before signing. So if your buyer or seller wants to have their attorney look over the contract before they sign it, absolutely, they should do that. Expect to see it come back with some red markings on it, which kind of invalidates our contract, but it really doesn't. Anytime an attorney does that, it has to be presented. Just make sure that all parties understand it. But attorneys don't think they're doing their jobs unless they cross things out. So with red pen, it's always with red pen. Seller hereby authorizes closing agent to obtain payoff information from the seller's lender. Kind of deal with that in our listing agreements as well. And then buyer and seller hereby specifically permit the brokerages assisting in the transaction to obtain and retain copies of both buyers and sellers closing statements. So again, state law requires that. It is information it is certain information that we get that are kind of automatic for us, so the preliminary title report, and then the closing statement that you should get a copy of a day or two, we hope, before the law says 3 days before closing, but sometimes it doesn't happen that quickly either. That again, very, 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 very important for you to look over those closing statements when you receive them to make sure that the closing statements reflect everything that the contract says. If you have fallen short, you or the other agent have fallen short on getting an amendment or a change, anything that changes terms or money in our contract, the title company should have received a copy of it and the lender should have received a copy of it. And if that's not reflected, it's your responsibility to check that closing statement to make sure that everything is reflected. If not, you're the one that has to let the title company and lender know that a change needs to be made. Line 845 would be on the seller side. If they're going to be making a counter offer, they would check the box on line 845. So again, if there's a counter offer involved and you're representing the buyer, make sure that that box has been checked on the original offer. The person making the offeror in the situation, usually the buyer, signs the document. All buyers sign here. Then as a consideration for you, you will absolutely fill in your side over here, the brokerage name, brokerage address, your name, your contact information and the brokerage contact phone number and your email address. As a consideration, again, just an indication to that listing agent that, hey, I'm going to be a great agent to work with. I'm going to be doing my fair share of the work. Go ahead and fill in the listing agent's side of that transaction as well. Again, if it's a for sale by owner, it's going to be your information, all that same information over on the other side. But just be a good agent. It's an indication to the seller and the listing agent that just one more reason why they should choose your buyer's offer over any other offer. Once then you have sent this to the buyer and they have initialed every page, signed page 13 and signed this last page 16 here, then and only then are you going to sign the line on 880. Our form certification to be signed by the licensee preparing the form. And I wish that we could say after the buyer signatures, the offeror signatures. Because what this paragraph is saying is that no one has made changes to these pre-approved forms. We filled in blanks, but we have not crossed out anything or added any verbiage in any weird place in the document. Once again, this is something that's come up in the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to not only this form, any form that is provided by KCRAR, we cannot alter the document itself. We can change terms if the two parties want to change the terms, but that is always done with an amendment. We cannot strike out anything that's in the contract. We cannot add verbiage, to the side. Not allowed. State license law. We are not attorneys. State license law doesn't, that's not just our brokerage preference. State license law does not allow us to do that. So your signature on line 880 is the verification that no one has done anything to alter the documents other than fill in blanks. All right, the blanks that are already there. So you can't sign that legitimately until after you've received the document back from your buyer and made sure that they didn't add anything, right? And then one other way to kind of ensure that is you send it to them. You've already signed page 13 before you send it to them. If they're trying to make any changes to the document other than putting their own signatures on here, it will erase your signature and you'll be notified of that. So that's one way for you to ensure that they have not made any changes to it. So, and plus you are always just sending it to them with the status in .loop. If you're sending it through .loop, and DocuSign has the same, but I can't remember their verbiage, that can view and sign. Don't allow your buyers to be able to edit the form. All right, just don't. All right, so you sign this when you get it back. A little bit of confusion on what this last box is on our form. This is the certification of rejection to be completed only upon seller's rejection of offer. If the seller says, nope, I don't like this offer, I don't like it enough that I'm not even going to make a counter offer to it. I don't ever want to hear from this buyer again. Right? So the listing agent calls you and tells you that. No, seller's rejected your offer. They're not going to be making any counter offers. You have every right, if the listing agent doesn't provide this for you automatically, you have every right to ask for this box to be signed. And you will see that it is the licensee assisting the seller that signs it. The seller is not signing it. The seller's not going to sign anything on this if they're rejecting your offer outright. However, the licensee assisting the seller, they are attesting to the fact that it was presented to the seller and the seller has rejected it. There might be some times in your career where you might question the fact that it's been presented. Just saying. So you have every right to ask for the licensee's signature on this. So that's it. That's our contract. Then the next thing that I want to share, oh, yeah, I do think. I'm going to stop share here and get back to then this other form. The last half hour, 25 minutes that we have here, we're going to prepare to write an offer, right? We've gone through the mechanics of the offer itself, of the contract itself. We are now going to prepare to write an offer. This starts way before you ever show the property. There's this form available. If you all, this is available to you in the in Kristen's Power Tools, which I think a lot of them have been uploaded into Digital Chalk. And I'm not 100% sure that all of them have or which ones have. So if this is something that you want, and I say every month when I go over this, that yes, I need to work on updating this. We need our new logo at the top, and it really needs to be updated because some things are a little bit different than they are reflected here. But this is still a really, really, really good form for you to have. Make your own checklist from, or use this form, whatever works best for you. But to prepare, lots of things that you need to do before you sit down to write an offer. And this is a really, really good resource for you. If you can't find it in Kristen's Power Tools, which are still available on the portal, that's a really hard thing to kind of muddle your way through, though. Reach out to me and I will send you a copy of this version of it. And then at some point in time, I will have an updated version, but I'm happy to send anyone a copy of this. We're going to go over this in the next few minutes that we have, the last few minutes that we have here in this hour, but this starts way, way, way before you sit down to write the offer. It starts, and in fact, it starts in a different order than this, to my way of thinking, than this form presents. So we'll go over that here. But must have these things in place first. We will start there. You need to have your agency disclosure brochure sent to your buyer. Again, you've already done that, I hope, when you have sent your agency agreement to them. So again, send it for both states to begin with, but make sure that you've sent it for the state in which this property is located, just to make sure that you're covered there. So your agency disclosure brochure, your exclusive buyer agency agreement signed, and your pre-approval letter or proof of funds already in your buyer loop. Make sure, we used to be able to kind of put that off. We can't anymore. You have to have something in writing from your buyer before you ever go show a property. So make sure that your loop is complete there. Now let's talk about the pre-approval letter. When you have received that pre-approval letter, there are certain things that you make sure you've read it. I think that you should go ahead and make a phone call to the loan officer, introducing yourself. Especially if it's one that you're not familiar with, that you haven't worked with before. And even if what is one that you've worked with before, reach out to them and say, hey, I'm going to be the agent working with Bob and Betty, buyer over here. Just want to let you know, looking forward to working with you again. But make sure that you've read the pre-approval letter and that it includes all of the information that you are going to need to make the offer. A lot of them do not. Some of them are very basic. Some of them give you more information than you need, but some of them are very basic. So two things that you need from the lender: the pre-approval letter, and then also when you make that initial phone call to them, that's a great time to ask them, hey, do you have a good faith estimate that you can send me of your closing costs so that I can prepare my estimate of cost worksheet for the buyer? Great time for you to ask that and get that ahead of time. So because you're going to have to do that estimated worksheet for the buyer with every offer that you write. It's great if you can use the lender's own fund estimates of cost for that. So again, some of theirs are going to be estimates too, but their loan costs you're going to know. And when you get that, make sure that includes everything that needs to be included on your estimated, because most of them won't. They won't have your commission on there. They won't, some of them don't include inspection costs or not a realistic number for inspection costs. If you know your buyer's going to be wanting to do a sewer line inspection and a radon and, you know, in any other special inspection. So those two items you need to begin with, the good faith estimate and the pre-approval letter. Then the things to check to see if the pre-approval letter addresses. It should tell you what type of loan your buyer's getting. Is it conventional? Is it FHA? Is it VA? Is it USDA? Is it a lender assisted down payment program? Right? So should make all of that perfectly clear. We hope that it will indicate to you sale price versus loan price or loan amount. From that, you can figure what the down payment is that the buyer's coming up with. It might tell you exactly the down payment program. It might say 10% down payment, but if given the sales price and the loan amount for their maximum, you can figure that out. So then what you would need to determine is, oh, is it always going to be a 20% down regardless of what the sale price is? Or is it going to be a flat amount that the buyer's putting down? Are they going to be putting down $40,000 as down payment regardless of the sale price of the property? So you need to know that. The interest rate. Most of them will indicate an interest rate. And what you need to know is, well, what if interest rates go up? Has the buyer locked into this interest rate? And what happens if interest rates go up? Is that going to affect their pre-approved amount? Or is it going to knock them completely out of any offer? So those things are imperative for you to know, and it's best to deal with all of that before you ever even go look at properties, much less before you sit down to write the offer, because those are things that we have to designate in our offer. Most of them will tell you the terms of the term of the note, whether it's a 15, 20, or 30-year note. Most of them will say that on there, but again, make sure that they do. So those things, the type of loan, the down payment, that you're either told or you configure, and whether that's the flat amount or always going to be a percentage, the interest rate and how that affects your buyer, and the term of the note. Have to know all of those things. All right, then also you're looking at the seller's disclosure. Hopefully you've sent a copy of the seller's disclosure to the buyer so they can look it over. They may not even want to go see the property after seeing that. So you've done all of that, but you have a copy of it, and you've as you're going through the property, you're going through page 7, you're going through actually the entire all pages of that to verify the information that the seller has disclosed, see what is concern might be a concern for the buyer, something that you need to address in the contract itself. Again, looking at you know, any outbuildings or any fencing that's more than 30 feet from the improvement. All of those things, as you're going through the property, you're asking them about things that may not be directly addressed or questionable on the seller's disclosure. Hey, what about these shelves over here? They don't appear to be attached. The seller might take them with them. Is that okay with you? Those kinds of things. So all these things before you go to the property and while you're at the property. While you're at the property then, and the buyer's saying, oh yeah, we want to put an offer in on this one. So again, inevitably you're going to be they are going to ask you, well, what do you think we should offer? So here's what you say to them. It's like, I can't tell you what to offer, but what I am going to do, and again, we hope that you are given enough time in the situation to do this. Say, I'm going to prepare CMA for you, and the numbers will tell you, so I can tell you what the numbers say. And when I'm talking, and this is me now talking, when I'm talking with buyers in this situation, that's exactly what I say. I say, I'm going to do a CMA for you, just as if we're going to pretend that you already own the property and you've called me to put it on the market. So from that CMA, we would determine a probable list price. And so that's what the numbers are going to say. But buyer, you and only you are the ones that determine what the property is worth for you. It may be more than my CMA says, or it may be less. If it's more, there are some things for us to consider. We may have an appraisal issue come up. Do you have extra funds to bring if the seller won't renegotiate the price with you? So all of that conversation to have before you're ever putting anything in the contract as far as numbers. And probably before you ever leave the property. And so then that's when I make my phone call. I rarely make the phone call to the listing agent in front of the buyers. Sometimes I have to, but I really prefer to have that as a conversation between me and the listing agent only. So I tell my buyers, hey, I'm going to be calling the listing agent as I'm driving back to the office or home, wherever you're going to be writing the offer. If the buyers want to sit with you while writing the offer, that's, completely up to all of you. Just prepare them for either way, whether they're going to be sitting with you or you're splitting up for you to go write it. Prepare them for the fact that it's going to take you a couple of hours to do this. I do that. I take that much time, even after doing this for 40 years. You certainly are, right, as newer agents. So prepare them that it's going to be a while. So they may as well, go get dinner or, go do something else. It's going to be a couple of hours before you get the paperwork to them to sign. If they want to sit with you, but while you're writing it, again, I would say, all right, you guys go something to eat or go do something and come back to me. I've got a lot of material that I've got to collect before we're ready to actually put things on paper. Because you do. All right. So documents you need for your offer. So now you are sitting down to actually write things up. So the residential real estate sale contract, you'll need a copy of that, a copy of the pre-approval letter, because that will go with your offer. A copy, and here's one of the things that need to maybe be a little bit updated, copy of the earnest check. A lot of buyers, it's not unheard of still in today's day and age, that a buyer's going to be writing a check for their earnest deposit. Most of the time, we're seeing that being done as an ACH or a wire transfer. But if they're going to be writing a check, so clarify with them, are they going to be writing a check? Or how are they going to be making that earnest deposit? So if they're going to be writing a check, make sure that they can give you a copy of it. We used to actually collect the check and then keep it with the offer and make a photocopy of it. In this day and age, you can get a photo of it as perfectly okay. I would, if it's going to be a check, I would still send a copy of that check along with the offer. So, but again, just verify the way that deposit is going to be made. If it is going to be an earnest, a check itself, you need a copy of it. The seller's disclosure addendum, whatever seller's disclosure is available to you, the buyer will need to sign as an acknowledgement that they have received it and seen it and read it. The KCRAR form, they will initial each page and sign page 8 of that. For those of you that are participating in the contract challenge this month, there's a little trick to that one. It's a seller's disclosure. It's not the one that we offer through KCRAR, but our buyer still needs to acknowledge that. So need that. The lead-based paint disclosure, if one's required, if the property was built before 1978, then that should be available to you. And again, your buyer's going to initial that they have received any information, if they have received test results and all of that, if they've received the pamphlet. So again, double check that you have shared that EPA pamphlet with them, and that they have either received or waived a right, received a right to do inspections or waived their right to do inspections. So they will be initialing 2 places, possibly 3, on the first page of the lead-based paint disclosure. And all parties, you included, will be signing page 2 of that lead-based paint disclosure. So you'll be assigning everyone's, and you'll always be getting the seller's disclosure and the lead-based paint as PDFs through dotloop. So you have to know how to assign initials and signatures there. Company franchise addendum, again, this needs to be updated. We no longer require the other party to the transaction to sign our affiliated business disclosure and franchise addendum, but the co-op company may require your buyer to sign it. So if there is one in the documents in MLS from RE/MAX or Realty Execs, or whatever other franchise company, then you need to pull that over and again, assign your buyer's name to that, signature to that. On a lot of those, you're going to need to assign your buyer's name to the top of that too. And any other documents that are in MLS, including a legal description addendum, if the listing agent has provided one. Need to have assign your buyer's name to the top and assign their signatures to the bottom. And again, with any other documents in MLS. A new construction, corporate owned properties will have other documents that your buyer will need to sign. Typical co-op resale properties might have a cold weather waiver. The seller may have included it in its present condition, and if your buyer's agreeable to those terms, have them sign that. So any other documents in MLS and the MLS documents. Then oh gosh, and I think I forgot to say it. So, or forgot to continue on with my thought. As you're leaving the property, and you're telling the buyer, think about what you want to offer and, you know, the terms, tell them what terms that they're going to need to be thinking about, which again, I think this whole form is a little bit out of order. So when I update it, I'm going to put things in a little bit different order here. But that's when and you're calling the listing agent in your car. And so the questions that you're asking the listing agent, how can we accommodate that? Well, number one, in today's market. So do you have any other interest in the property right now? Do you have any other offers in hand? Do you have any offers coming in? Do you have any second showings scheduled? Have other agents called you with indication that they have buyers that are interested? The listing agent may or may not be authorized to give you that information. And so they take that for what it's worth. I love it when I get those chatty agents. You know, you're going to get some agents that just yes and no answers and might say, I can't tell you if I've got other offers or not. I'm not authorized to do so. And that's where they end it. Take that for what it's worth. Sometimes, and I just find myself, you know, just kind of giggling to myself, you might get really chatty agents that might tell you all kinds of things about the seller and the seller situation that they may not should be able to tell, should not be telling you. They may tell you it's a divorce situation or that the buyer sellers are being transferred. They may be authorized to tell you those things, but chances are not, because you know, now because internally I'm thinking, oh, great, we can probably make a low ball offer. There's a need to sell here. They're under duress, and especially if there's no other interest in the property at this point in time. So you're gathering all kinds of information, but how can we accommodate the seller on closing if your buyer has the flexibility to do so? And that might be something that you can, you know, can kind of negotiate kind of verbally there. To begin with, and let your buyer know that after the fact. So call the listing agent to see what's going on and to gather whatever information you can. Then do a CMA in the neighborhood for the buyer, and let the buyer know. Again, letting them know the numbers, what the numbers are telling you. You cannot ever tell a buyer what to offer for a property. Absolutely not ever. All right, so there you go. All right. Buyers need to determine. So these are things that you're preparing the buyer for. What are you going to offer? So the offer price. How much earnest deposit are you going to put down and in what form? What closing and possession dates would you prefer? But I'm going to be asking the listing agent what the seller would prefer too. That's something maybe we can't offer as much as other people would offer, but if we can accommodate the seller, that might be more important to the seller. If the seller wants a 90-day closing, and our buyer can do that. So make sure you're having that conversation with your buyer up front. Closing and possession dates, closing costs, make sure you are doing that estimated proceeds for the offer so that the buyer knows if they don't have enough cash to do that themselves, that they're going to need to ask the seller to provide some or possibly all of their closing costs. So that the clarification of that to the buyer is so very important. Home warranty, because we have to ask them about the home warranty. Do they want one? Do they want to ask this or not? Do they want to ask the seller to buy it, or do they want to purchase it on their own? What inspection period works for them? Do they want to shorten it? Do they want to lengthen it? And buyer, it's kind of important for you to be there for for the whole thing if possible, but at least for a wrap up with the inspector if you can't be there for the whole thing. So what day would work best for you? How much time should we allow for that? Any additional inclusions or exclusions that they want to add or any additional terms? And then buyer, how long do you want this offer to be good for to the seller? What works for you? Information you need to fill out the sales contract, the legal names of your buyers. That's why I suggest you do that on your buyer agency agreement. The legal names of the sellers, said that the best place to get that is on the seller's disclosure, if there's one available, or any other document that is available to you through MLS that has the current seller's name. Tax records or calling the listing agent. That's another thing to verify with the listing agent. Another thing to verify with the listing agent while you have them on the phone is if they have marked themselves as a seller's agent or as a transaction broker, just say, so I see that you're seller's agent, is that correct? Right? Because again, you may not, that agent may not be aware of how they should fill it out, but if you've done your due diligence, that's all you can do. The legal description of the property that's available in tax records, copy and paste is perfectly fine. Any MLS supplements, we talked about that. Make sure that you're clear on the financing terms. Do that before, and here's why I think you should do that before, as soon as you get that pre-approval letter, is because you may be on a time frame writing your offer. And now if you're trying to call that loan officer, they may not be available. And you may not have then all of the proper information in which to fill out the contract. That may hold you up. That might knock you out of the running if you can't get that information on your offer deadline. So be prepared with as much as you possibly can before you ever even go see the property. The listing agent's role, we talked about that. The required KW Key Partners internal documents. So we have to have an estimated expense worksheet for the offer, for that specific offer. Do it, and because legally speaking, and both Kansas and Missouri require this, it should be, their signature should be timed and dated before the offer. Because how else are they going to know what their closing costs are going to be? How else, based on this offer, how else are they going to know what their payment is going to be for this offer? So absolutely required. And again, I think I warned you, or I did, I know, last week when we were talking about the buyer agency agreement. The broker will hold your commission check if that's not in the file. So state license law requires that everybody gets in trouble if it's not there. Your exclusive buyer agency contract has to be in your folder, and then our affiliated business disclosure and franchise announcement. Oh my gosh, 2 minutes to spare. Amy had told me at the end of the first hour that she was leaving. So, but I do have everybody else's name. Just to double check, I've got Douglas, Caitlin, Amber, Jocelyn, Brooke, Ashley, and Jody. I've got Douglas, Caitlin, Amber, Jocelyn, Brooke, Ashley, and Jody, and I had Amy for the first hour. So everybody gets credit for being here. Thanks for hanging out with me for these two hours. If you have any questions about anything, you know to reach out. I know this is a multiple time for some of you, and kudos to you for sitting through this. You know, and sitting through it is important. I hope that you're getting something out of it, but I also understand that then the first time you sit down to write an offer, all of this is going to completely escape you. So don't hesitate to reach out to your coach. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. If it's on a weekend, you know, your coach may not be available. If it's on a weekend, reach out to me. I want to make sure that everybody knows that, you know, your coaches have other stuff going on too, as do I. But you know, as your contracts coach, if you've got a weekend situation, I'm not going to help you with marketing. I'm not going to help you with lead gen. That is your coach stuff, and all of that can wait until a weekday. But if you've got a client or customer situation, absolutely reach out to me. I am more than happy to help you with that at any time, and especially if you're on weekends, or anytime if you're trying to reach out to your coach and they're unavailable and you need an immediate answer. But I will say too, there are very few real estate related emergencies. There are some things that need to be done in a very timely manner, and so don't ever hesitate to reach out. And then, as I said, if you want a copy of that ready to write an offer form, email me with your request on that, and I'll be happy to send you a PDF copy of that. I do promise that at some point we will get that updated, but it's good enough for right now. It's really a very good form as it sits. It just needs to be updated just a little bit. All right, nobody's interrupted with any questions. I don't see anything in chat. So anyway, everybody have a great rest of your week. I expect to see some of you tonight at Wednesday Night Warriors. I don't have very many contracts for the contract challenge that have been presented to me. Oh, thank you, Douglas. Douglas told me that my classes are always good. Well, I appreciate that very much. I do appreciate that validation. So I hope everybody gets something through it. But I hope to see a lot of you at Wednesday Night Warriors tonight. If you're going to send me an offer, if you don't get it to me by, I will say 2 o'clock. I really, really would love to have those in on Monday before the Wednesday Night Challenge is presented. But I know it's been a weird couple of weeks with spring breaks and all that kind of thing. So if you get it to me by 2 today, then I will still consider it for, I will still present it tonight, or I'll get you your corrections and then still present it tonight. So, all right, that's it. Everybody have a great day. Hope to see you tonight, but I'll certainly see you around. So, oh, somebody else sent me a chat too. Oh, from Ashley. All right. Thanks to all of you. See ya.